In a small African village lived a man named Kwasi, born with skin as white as snow and pale as the moonlight. Rejected by the villagers due to his albinism, Kwasi grew up lonely and isolated. From the moment Kwasi came into the world in Uzoma village, he was greeted not with joy and celebration, but with whispers of fear and suspicion. As a child, Kwasi was a curious and gentle soul, eager to explore the world around him. However, his albinism set him apart from his peers, marking him as different in the eyes of the villagers. They shunned him, treating him with contempt and disdain. On the dusty streets of Uzoma, Kwasi was subjected to cruel taunts and jeers from the other children. They called him names like ghost and freak, their words cutting deep into his tender heart. No matter where he went, he could not escape the harsh reality of his existence. Even the adults in the village regarded Kwasi with suspicion, believing him to be cursed by the spirits or touched by dark magic. They averted their eyes whenever he passed by, as if afraid that his otherness might somehow infect them. At school, Kwasi was often excluded from games and activities, left to play alone in the shade while the other children laughed and played in the sun. He longed to join in their fun, but he knew that he would never be accepted, no matter how hard he tried. Despite the cruelty he faced on a daily basis, Kwasi refused to let the hatred of others extinguish the light within him. He found solace in the beauty of nature, spending hours exploring the forests and fields that surrounded the village. As Kwasi grew older, the sting of rejection from his fellow villagers only deepened. While other young men in the village were welcomed into the fold of adulthood with open arms, Kwasi found himself on the fringes of society, forever relegated to the shadows. Despite his best efforts to prove himself worthy of acceptance, Kwasi could not escape the prejudice that followed him like a dark cloud. As he entered adolescence, his longing for companionship grew more intense, fueled by a desire to find someone who would see past his albinism and love him for who he truly was. Kwasi's heart yearned for the warmth of human connection, but time and again, he was met with rejection from the young ladies of the village. They whispered behind their hands as he passed by, casting him sidelong glances filled with scorn and derision. No matter how kind or gentle he was, no woman in the village would give him a second glance. They turned up their noses at the mere sight of him, their rejection cutting him to the core. As the years passed, Kwasi watched from the sidelines as his peers paired off and started families of their own. He longed to experience the joy of love and companionship, but he knew that such happiness would forever elude him in the eyes of the villagers. Despite the pain of his loneliness, Kwasi refused to give up hope. He continued to search for someone who would see him for the kind and caring person he was. One bright morning, as Kwasi ventured into the heart of the village to collect water from the communal well, he spotted Amma sitting beneath the shade of a baobab tree, her laughter tinkling like wind chimes in the breeze. Unlike the other villagers, Amma greeted Kwasi with a warm smile and a gentle nod, her eyes sparkling with kindness. Amma hailed from a distinguished lineage, her family tracing its roots back to ancient rulers of the land. From a young age, Amma was raised in the lap of luxury. Her father, Chief Ose, was a respected elder in the village, renowned for his wisdom and generosity. Under his leadership, the village prospered, its fields yielding bountiful harvests, and its people living in peace and harmony. Amma inherited her father's intelligence and charm, as well as her mother's grace and beauty. With her ebony skin and almond-shaped eyes, she was the epitome of African beauty, her radiant smile capable of lighting up even the darkest of rooms. Despite her privileged upbringing, Amma possessed a kind and compassionate heart. She treated everyone she met with respect and dignity, regardless of their station in life, earning her the admiration and respect of all who knew her. Though she had her pick of suitors from far and wide, Amma remained uninterested in the shallow pursuits of courtship and marriage. She longed for a love that transcended wealth and status, a love that would accept her for who she truly was, flaws and all. Intrigued by Amma's genuine warmth, Kwasi approached her cautiously, his heart fluttering with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. As they exchanged pleasantries, Kwasi felt a sense of ease wash over him, as if he had finally found someone who accepted him for who he was. Over time, Kwasi and Amma's chance encounter blossomed into a deep and meaningful friendship. They spent hours talking beneath the shade of the baobab tree, sharing their hopes, dreams, and fears with one another. Despite the disapproval of the villagers, who viewed their budding relationship with suspicion, Kwasi and Amma remained steadfast in their bond, finding joy in each other's company. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Kwasi and Amma's friendship blossomed into love. They shared stolen moments together, stealing kisses beneath the moonlight and dreaming of a future where they could be together without fear of judgment. Kofi, known far and wide for his striking good looks and charismatic charm, was the most handsome and popular boy in the village, and he was used to getting everything he desired, including the attention of the most eligible maidens. When Kofi first laid eyes on Amma, he was captivated by her beauty and grace. He set his sights on winning her affections, convinced that she would be powerless to resist his charms. However, much to Kofi's dismay, Amma showed no interest in his advances, choosing instead to spend her time with Kwasi, the albino outsider. Enraged by Amma's rejection, Kofi's jealousy festered like a poison in his heart, driving him to seek revenge against the one who had dared to steal his prize. He saw Kwasi as nothing more than a lowly outsider, unworthy of Amma's attention, and he vowed to rid the village of his presence once and for all. Gathering his cronies, a group of young men who hung on his every word, Kofi concocted a devious plan to discredit Kwasi, drive a wedge between him and Amma, and ultimately drive Kwasi away from the village for good. One afternoon, while all the villagers assembled in the town hall, Kofi and his cronies snuck into Chief Obi's house and stole one of his goats. They then hid the goat somewhere in Kwasi's compound. A few hours after the village meeting, an alarm was raised in Chief Obi's compound. One of his goats was nowhere to be found. Amidst the commotion, Kofi and his friends told everyone present that they spotted what looked like Chief Obi's goat tied in Kwasi's compound. An enraged Chief Obi and other villagers marched down to Kwasi's compound, and to their surprise, found the missing goat tied to a tree. Immediately, a confused and innocent Kwasi was dragged to the king's palace. Chief Obi told the king all that had happened, and how they found his missing goat in Kwasi's compound. He accused him of being a thief, and no matter how much Kwasi tried to explain or defend himself, no one believed him or came to his aid. This incident, coupled with years of fear and suspicion amongst the villagers, left the king with no choice but to banish Kwasi from the village for good. News of Kwasi's banishment soon spread around the village. While Kofi and some villagers rejoiced upon hearing the news, Amma was totally broken and devastated. She cried and cried for days. Alone and afraid, Kwasi wandered through the forest. After days of walking through the forest exhausted and dehydrated, Kwasi collapsed. Kwasi was rescued by a farmer who took him back to his village. After some days had passed, Kwasi finally regained his strength and told the farmer his life story and how he ended up in Madhu village. The farmer listened to him and told him he was welcomed to stay for as long as he wanted. The villagers also paid him no mind, and in no time Kwasi settled amongst them. One fateful day, while Kwasi was wandering the forest, he stumbled upon Prince Adisa, who was being attacked by a fierce lion. Without hesitation, Kwasi leaped to the prince's rescue, driving the lion away with his bravery. Impressed by Kwasi's heroism, King Akin of Madhu village bestowed upon him a great reward and offered him a place in the palace as a trusted advisor. Kwasi accepted the offer, grateful for the opportunity. In the palace, Kwasi found himself immersed in a world of luxury and opulence. He proved himself to be invaluable to the king, using his wisdom and insight to aid in matters of state, and as time passed, Kwasi's bond with King Akin deepened, and he became like a son to the king. In return for his loyalty and dedication, the king showered Kwasi with wealth and riches, elevating him to a position of power and influence within the kingdom. As Kwasi's fortunes grew, he often thought of Amma and wondered if she was happy and doing well. He later learned that she had fallen on hard times, struggling to care for her ailing mother and younger siblings after the death of her father. One day, King Akin announced that he would host a grand banquet to celebrate Kwasi's many accomplishments and to honor his unwavering loyalty to the kingdom. Kwasi was also going to pick a wife from the event. The entire village and other neighboring villages was invited to attend. Kwasi was delighted. Kwasi made a suggestion to the king. He asked that his face and body be covered during the celebration, and at the right time he would unveil himself to the people and then pick a bride. The king found the suggestion interesting and agreed without hesitation. Back in Uzoma village, news spread of the upcoming banquet in Madu Kingdom and the prince's desire to pick his bride on that day. All the maidens began to prepare themselves. Upon hearing the news of the banquet, Amma wasn't really concerned. She had a lot of responsibilities, and getting married or attending great feasts wasn't at the top of her list. Besides, the only man she had ever wanted or loved was probably already dead. When Amma's sick mother heard of the upcoming banquet and her daughter's refusal to attend, she became very sad. She summoned her daughter Amma and pleaded with her to attend the banquet. She told her daughter, "Events like this don't happen often, and a change of scenery, laughter, and fun, even for a short while, will do you good." To appease her mother, Amma decided to attend the banquet. The day of the banquet arrived, and the palace was adorned with flowers and candles. Villagers from far and wide gathered to pay homage to Kwasi, the hero who had captured their imagination. Despite her reluctance, Amma mustered the courage to attend the banquet. She dressed in her finest attire and set out for the palace, her heart pounding with anticipation. While the people were eating, dancing, and making merry, it was time for Kwasi, the man of the hour, to greet the people and pick his bride from the long line of beautiful maidens who came from all over just for this moment. As Kwasi unveiled himself, the people of Uzoma who had rejected him all stood in shock at the sight. They couldn't believe that the almighty Kwasi, whose fame spread far and wide, was the same albino boy they had banished from their village. They all hung their head in shame and regret. Amma, who was standing at the back with the others, could not believe her eyes. Seeing Kwasi standing resplendent in his royal robes, her breath caught in her throat, and she started to cry as their eyes met. And she felt a surge of emotion, unlike anything she couldn't believe her eyes. She immediately began to walk towards Kwasi, until finally the both of them were reunited. To the surprise of everyone present, Kwasi humbly requested the hand of Amma in marriage, declaring his love for her in front of the entire village. His words echoed through the palace halls, filling the air with a sense of wonder and awe. Overwhelmed with emotion, Amma could scarcely believe her ears. Tears of joy streamed down her cheeks as she realized that her deepest wish for so long was about to come true. King Akin smiled upon Kwasi and Amma with fondness, granting his blessing for their union. He praised their courage and resilience, declaring that their love was a testament to the power of the human spirit. A grand wedding feast was held in honor of Kwasi and Amma, with villagers from near and far gathering to celebrate their union. The palace was filled with laughter and music as the newlyweds danced beneath the stars. As Kwasi and Amma exchanged vows, they vowed to cherish each other for all eternity. With the blessings of the king and the village, they embarked on a new chapter of their lives together. In the years that followed, Kwasi and Amma lived happily ever after, and albinos were no longer treated with fear and disdain.